It's the Packet Thrower! Welcome to the channel! Continuing our HCIO review, we're going to wrap up Nutanix by having a look at using the VMware option instead of the native Nutanix hypervisor. We can see that everything looks the same except for in the corner we can see that this is ESXi. And if we look at the ESXi, we can see the familiar VMware page. It has gone ahead and deployed the CVM virtual machine for the storage and hasn't really done anything else yet. So what we need to do is present the storage, and then we're going to have to deploy vCenter so we can finish up our integrations. We can do that by going back to our Prism, and then we can go to storage and hop over to the storage pool. And we'll just rename this so it's a bit more clear. So I'm just going to say that this is Test Lab Storage Pool. So now we can go over to the storage container and we'll create one. We will call this VMware Storage Container. Now the difference here is we can see that we have NFS data store and it is going to mount on all ESX hosts, or we can pick particular hosts there. So essentially what's going to happen here is that Nutanix is going to present this 11 terabytes to the VMware host as NFS share. So I'm going to go ahead and hit save. And we can see it successfully mounted the storage on all three hosts. So if I go back to my host here, and we have a look at storage, we can see we have our storage container created, and we have about 5.6 terabytes free. If we look back over here, we can see that that matches what we have for our containers. We can always clear up data if we need to, but that's plenty for our lab purposes. So the next thing we need to do is we need to actually create some networking, because Prism is not managing our networking at this point. So we're going to go here, and we can see the installer has created a VM network and is using VLAN 241, and then has created some management networks and backplanes so that it can talk to the CVM. What I'm going to do is add a port group for our server network. And in this environment, this is going to be 251. Now I can adjust the networking there, but we're not going to worry too much about this until we have our vCenter, so I'm just going to go add. And then I'm going to create a virtual machine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to deploy a Windows server, and the reason why is, one, I can use that as a domain controller for our network, and two is that the actual vCenter installer is an ISO that kicks off a workflow instead of being an OVA or something like that there. So I'm just going to use that to kick off the vCenter installation. So we'll go create new VM. And I'm going to call this DC01. So this is Windows, and this is going to be a 2019 server, so that's close enough. We'll put that in our storage container. And since we have plenty of memory, I'm just going to go ahead and say that this can be 4 CPUs, and this can be 16 gig of RAM. And it can have 400 gigs, why not? For our network, we're going to pick server and go next. So now I just need to boot this up. And we can access the console. Now, because I have VMware Workstation enabled, I can actually directly manage it through this tool, which makes things a little bit easier. So I'm going to go ahead and go settings. Okay, in the settings, I have mounted Windows 2019 server, and I've connected it. So we're just going to go OK. And we're just going to boot from the CD-ROM. The Windows setup is pretty straightforward, so I'm just going to plow through it here. Install. I'll install desktop. I'll pick data center, doesn't really matter for this. And we'll accept the license. Do a custom install. And from here I'll pause the video until we're up and running. Okay, our VM is installed. I went ahead and gave it a name and an IP address. And what we're going to do is just install the domain controller role, because we're going to be using some DNS entries in a minute. So we'll just go ahead and add these. Now that's installed. Next we just need to promote the server. And we're just going to go ahead and add this to my usual test lab. Need to give it a password here. So again, I'll pause things and we'll have a look when it's up, and then we'll make our DNS records that we'll need for our VMware. Okay, our domain controller is up and running. So what we want to do now is create some DNS records. And we want to create a reverse lookup zone because we are using a subnet that the domain controller doesn't know about. And that is going to be 10.11.241. This is where our ESX hosts live, and this is where our vCenter is going to live. So under our for lookup zone, we will go ahead, and then we're going to create a record. This is going to be NX ESX01, and it's going to be 11.241.101. We're going to create a pointer record, go add. Do the same thing for the other two. And lastly, we'll create one for our vCenter. And I'm just going to say this is 241.100. So with that done, we can move our way over to the actual installation for vCenter. Okay, so I have mounted the vCenter ISO. So we go over to the UI installer, go Windows, and then open up the installer. And it will give us this handy wizard that we can work through. So I'm going to say install. And we want to tell which ESX host, so we're just going to pick the first one, which is NX ESX01 testlab.com. And the username is root, and then by default it is going to be Nutanix/4u. So I'm just going to call this VCSA01. I'm going to give it a root password that I like. And we'll pick a size here. So since we have room, I'm just going to say that this is large and large. We'll put this in our VMware storage container. So for the network, I'm going to leave this as VM network. This is the default that's in the 241 VLAN. And then the fully qualified domain name will be vcsa testlab.com. The IP will be 10.11.241.100 with /24 and .1 is the gateway. The DNS is this server. And that should be all we need here. So I'm going to go finish, and this is going to run for a while, so I'll pause this again and we'll pick it up when we're done. So in stage 2, we have to do the compliance configuration, so we're going to allow SSH access, and I'm not too concerned about the time synchronization, so I'm just going to leave that at the host. And then for the single sign-on, we need to give it a domain. By default, it's going to be vSphere .local, and I don't really have a reason to change that. So we'll give that a password. And we don't really care about their customer experience improvement. So we're just going to go finish. And this is going to run for a bit longer, so I'll pause it yet again, and we'll have a look when we're done. Okay, that's finally done. So we can go ahead and click on our link. And then we can sign in with our password we set. And what we can do in here is we can go ahead and start building our data center. So we'll just say Tesla PDC. And I can add my hosts. Nutanix for you. And the last one here. So now what I can do is I can make a cluster. So I was going to call this PDC cluster. And we'll go ahead and turn on DRS, which is used for moving VMs around, and high availability, which will allow some fault tolerance. And we'll just drag each host into this, and we'll be happy. So at this point we have a working vCenter, we have a cluster, and we have our shared storage that we can use. So the last thing we can do in this video is finish our integration between the vCenter and the Nutanix Prism. So we'll go ahead and sign into Prism. So inside Prism, we can register the vCenter by going to Settings, and then vCenter Registration. And you can see that it has already detected the vCenter because it can tell that the hosts are registered to it. So I'm going to click on the Register button, and we're going to give it the SSO credentials. So at this point, vCenter is registered. So this means that we can choose to do things like create VMs directly from Prism if we wanted to. So for example, I can go VM and I can create a VM. And if I wanted to, I could create things directly through here. But personally, I find it better to work directly with vSphere rather than the Nutanix suite. But if you have integration reasons you want to do it, like maybe you have some Nutanix clusters and some VMware clusters and you want to do Prism Central and that kind of stuff, then that's an option for you. Anyway, in this video, we wrapped up our Nutanix discussion. We ventured into some strange stuff like domain controllers and DNS and set up vCenter, so we were all over the place in this one. See you next time.